Okay, love, so this is our conclusions mini lesson for research. And I included this little diagram because many times we talk about introductions going from broad to narrow and ending with our thesis statement to guide us into our body. But now, as we go back out into, let our readers sort of go back out into the world with our ideas, we want to start narrow, go recap what we're doing, and then leave them with a broad something to think about. And that is essentially what conclusions are, and we're going to take a look at that in a much more specific way. So the process of reading a research paper or an argument for the reader is really important, and as a writer we have to take them through that process very clearly. We remember from our introductions lesson that you open up with a very strong, meaningful, and focused tone, and you let them know where you're going, and then you use these incredible examples from reliable and viable and wonderful sources to prove your argument. And then as you leave, you don't want to just leave them with some anticlimactic last sentence where you're like, oh, no, that's kind of like our fourth grade robot, like, oh, that's it, thanks for listening. None of that. So we want to look at what conclusions can be to be very effective. And we're going to look at them as the 3 R's. So the first R is revisit. Revisit your thesis. Notice I didn't say restate, and I'll get into that in a second. Recap your main arguments. So much like we previewed our main arguments in our introduction, we're going to recap them, not in the same way, with a much different spin. And then we're going to reflect and relate to leave the audience thinking about our message. And this last part, it's really the most important because this is the last moment, thing, word, sentence, punctuation mark, whatever you need to think about that you're leaving your reader with to go out into the world and really think about your paper and your argument. Can they leave your paper and argument thinking about taking a stand or making a change without being you being overly persuasive and using those kinds of techniques that can be a little bit more pathos driven. We don't want to leave them. We want to let the proof is in the pudding. We want to let our facts and our details that we included and our reflections to really leave them with something to think about as they move on from our argument. So let's take a look at revisit, not restate, your thesis. You're going to take your most essential argument, which is your thesis, and rewrite it. So here's Ima's. Although the current trend of education promotes standard-based learning, teachers must not forget the importance of imagination in the classroom. So we've read that, we've heard it on all of these lessons. Now what she's going to do is she's going to write that down, and then she's going to identify the key words from that thesis and say them in a new way. So something that I suggest is to circle the most important words and phrases that you will want to include in your revisit. So she said teachers must not forget, so she would circle not forget, importance of imagination, and then classroom. Those are the 3 main ideas in the second part of her thesis, which is really her argument. So she has to figure out how is she going to re-say those. So we'll start here with not forget. To not forget is to remember, and also to not forget is to emphasize or put focus on. And so she decided to remember to reimagine, and emphasize might be 2 things that she might say. The importance of imagination is another thing she had circled, and she's going to talk about how why is it so important is because it's dwindling, it's going away, and it's really important to remember imagination. And then finally in classrooms she moves to schools because she wants to think of it in a little bit more global way, because as you're going back out, leading your reader back out into the world, they want to think about the implications of that message, and to go a little bit broader is what Ima decided to do. So here's her revisit. The role of imagination in American education is dwindling, and educators need to remember to reimagine their schools to emphasize it again. The next step is to recap, not restate, your main arguments. Take your main subtopic ideas, which we have in our outline and all of our paragraphs, and reflect on how those ideas build on one another or work together overall. And this is really hard. That's why conclusions are so hard, because we just don't know what to say. So here's a strategy that I have found to use that works for me. If you take every conclusion sentence from each one of your body paragraphs or subtopics, and you just take them right out of your paper and put them in a graphic organizer like this, you can kind of string them together and see what that argument looks like. How did all of my conclusion sentences function together? And then I can rewrite and summarize the important arguments over here. So you're not restating it, you're not just mushing these together and saying it verbatim, but you're putting it in new words, and this is a really great way of approaching it. So she talked about the argument for standards seems like the answer, but there's drawbacks. They must not overlook the importance of education, focus on the balancing of both, that teachers must consider the components to take control of the classroom, and that the global problems requires innovative, imaginative people. So that's from her outline, really, and that's what was in her paper. And now she's going to take that and look over here at the summary. In the face of an ever-standardizing world where students are compartmentalized, educators must learn to find equilibrium between state tests and the real creative work in the classroom. Although teachers cannot change policies aligned with No Child Left Behind itself, they can still reevaluate their practices and change the way they structure instruction, classrooms, and thinking about thinking. By doing so, they will ensure the students the future of the United States will be able to engage in the creative outside-of-the-box thinking they would need to innovate in the changing 21st century world of work, of living as they confront the questions and problems and possibilities that the future will bring. So that's a big mouthful, but she didn't exactly say the same thing. She really brought it out into the context of this global world and students moving on and thinking outside of the box. She's talking about why is all of this important? Because these people are the future, and that's really important. So the last thing is to reflect and relate on that sort of last sentence, and which also happens in the summary, but this last sentence is one of the most important. So you really want to leave the reader thinking. Take your argument and consider its implications and the importance of the bigger picture. What you could do is suggest an action, comment on the argument, how it's important in the grand scheme of things, in the country, in the globe, for humanity, or whatever. And then you're going to circle back and revisit your hook to bring closure. So whatever thing from your introduction that you chose, whether it was a quotation like Ima, whether it was a general statement, whether it was an anecdote, or I'm forgetting what else, whatever the fourth one was, then you're going to go back to that so you can kind of bring closure to everything. So what she decided to do was this outside-of-the-box thinking and the innovative change that she had summarized becomes this bigger, more meaningful piece to it. And then her circle back, remember that she chose that Robert Frost quote. Now, this is a different Robert Frost quote, but she takes it, same author, because he was talking about being bold. In order to be free, you have to be bold. And so she taps into some other form of knowledge about Robert Frost when he talked about taking the road less traveled. And she chose this because it really fits the idea of teachers taking a risk and being bold to continue to challenge the system and work for creativity. So let's take a look at her whole conclusion, and then we'll call it a day. So, Ima's conclusion. Remember, you want to leave a really solid, unified idea for your reader. The role of imagination in American education is dwindling, and educators need to reimagine their schools to emphasize it again. In the face of an ever-standardizing world where students are compartmentalized, educators must learn to find equilibrium between state tests and the real creative work in the classroom. Although teachers cannot change the policies aligned with No Child Left Behind itself, they can still reevaluate their practices and change the way they structure instruction, classrooms, and thinking about thinking. By doing so, they will ensure that the students, the future of the United States, will be able to engage in the creative, outside-of-the-box thinking they need to innovate in the changing 21st century world of work and of living as they confront questions and problems and possibilities that the future will bring. Heeding the words of Robert Frost, 2 roads diverged in wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. It is time to make a difference and use imagination to do so. So good luck with your conclusions. Think about what kind of impression you want to leave your people, and you'll do awesome.